He was small, alone, unwanted. No one stopped them. No one helped. But then, a voice rang out. One that changed everything. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" And in that moment, his fate took a sudden turn. The cold seeped into his bones. A tiny puppy, barely a few months old, curled up into a ball under a crooked wooden fence. He pressed his ears to his head, trying to shield himself from the piercing wind, but the frost clung to him like invisible icy fingers. His dark reddish fur was matted, tangled with dirt and wet snow, and his little paws trembled from the cold and exhaustion. Fear and confusion shone in his amber eyes. The puppy didn't understand what had happened. Just yesterday, he had been running around the yard, playing with his owner, wagging his tail in hopes of a treat. Sometimes they tossed him a piece of bread, sometimes they scratched behind his ear, and sometimes they just walked past him. But now, everything had changed. That morning, the farmhouse door had closed, and his owner had left. He never came back. No one stepped onto the porch. No one called his name. At first, the puppy waited, sitting by the door, his hopeful eyes fixed on it. Minutes passed, then hours. He whimpered, scratched at the wooden planks, but there was no answer. The wind grew stronger, the sky darkened, promising snowfall. At some point, hunger gripped his tiny belly with an iron fist. He tried to find something to eat. There were scraps of moldy bread in the corner of the yard, but they were frozen solid, as hard as stone. He tried to gnaw on one, but he was too weak. When the snow started falling in thick flakes, he wandered beyond the yard. His paws sank into the loose snow, each step a struggle. Slowly, he trudged down the street, where bright store windows shone and cars rushed past. He saw the silhouettes of people, heard their voices. "Oh, poor thing," someone muttered in passing. "He probably has an owner," another said without stopping. The puppy looked up. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the indifference in them. People walked by, not slowing down. Some glanced at him briefly, others turned away. He felt invisible. Another hour passed. He was exhausted. Every step was a battle, his legs barely obeying him. He made his way into a narrow alley where the wind wasn't as harsh and curled up tightly, trying to stay warm. His nose nestled into the thick fur on his paws. His breathing grew slow. He didn't know what to do next. He didn't know if he had a future. He was nobody's dog. The frost coated the streets with a thin layer of ice. Gusts of freezing wind swept through the alleyways, filling every corner, every crevice with snow. The puppy's second day of loneliness had become a real trial. He had found shelter. A pile of old wooden crates near an abandoned building seemed safe enough, but the cold was relentless. With each passing hour, it dug deeper, clinging to his fur, stiffening his movements. Frost covered his ears, and his breathing grew heavy, slow. He no longer had the strength to shiver. Curling into a tight ball, he tried to stay warm. The falling snow settled lightly on his back like a white shroud. A faint instinct whispered in his mind, "Move, search for food," but his body refused to obey. And then they appeared. A voice shattered the silence. "Look at this," came a mocking tone, dripping with fake surprise. 3 teenagers stepped closer. One, tall, wearing a dark jacket, a smug grin on his face. The second, shorter, hands stuffed into his pockets, lazily chewing gum. The third, red-haired, with sharp eyes that gleamed with something unpleasant. "Another filthy stray," the first one scoffed, kicking a cardboard box near the puppy's hiding spot. The puppy flinched. His eyes darted from side to side, his tail tucked tightly under his belly. "How long do you think he'll last?" The second boy smirked, crouching down. The puppy sensed their intentions. He didn't understand their words, but he knew. Pain was coming. A stick thrown by one of them struck his paw. A sharp yelp escaped his throat. "Oh, wow! He's still moving!" The redhead laughed. Another stick flew toward him. The puppy crawled backward, pressing himself against the ground. But there was no escape. They had him surrounded, like a pack of predators. "Hey, let's try—" one of them started, but a voice suddenly cut through the night. "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Sharp, firm, full of authority and fury. The boys froze. A tall man stepped out from around the corner. He wore an old military jacket, worn-out boots, and had a piercing gaze filled with disgust. "That's a living creature." His voice was calm, but there was a threat beneath it. "And you're acting worse than animals." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The teenagers exchanged glances. One sneered, another looked away. "Let's get out of here," the tall one muttered, turning on his heel. With a scoff, they disappeared into the alleyway. The puppy, still trembling, stared at the stranger with wide, frightened eyes. He was scared, but this man wasn't trying to hurt him. Michael let out a heavy sigh, his eyes fixed on the trembling puppy pressed against the frozen ground. His heart clenched with a mix of anger and pity. Throughout his life, he had witnessed pain and injustice, at war, in foreign lands, in the eyes of friends who were no longer there. But nothing ignited his fury quite like cruelty toward those who couldn't defend themselves. Before him was a tiny, fragile life that had known nothing but cold, hunger, and fear. Michael crouched down, extending his hands in a gesture of peace. His voice was low, steady, soothing. "Well, buddy, did they just leave you here to die?" The puppy didn't move. His dull amber eyes stayed locked on the man, void of trust, void of hope, holding only the vague, instinctive expectation of pain. He was bracing for it. That enraged Michael. How could someone abandon him like this? Who could throw him away like trash, leave him to freeze? Who could walk past, seeing him like this, and feel nothing? And those kids, those little bastards who had laughed, who had made a game out of his suffering. Michael clenched his jaw. He wanted to go after them, grab them by the collar, make them understand what it meant to be helpless. But there was something more important right now. He pulled off the glove from his right hand and slowly reached forward. "Come on, little guy." His voice softened even more. "You're okay now." The puppy flinched. His ears flattened, his paws pressed harder into the snow. He didn't believe. He couldn't. Humans only brought pain. Michael knew not to rush him. He stayed still, giving the pup time to get used to his presence. No sudden movements, no force, just patience. Minutes passed. Snow kept falling, melting into cold droplets on Michael's bare hand. The puppy took a deep breath, then another, and then he wavered and took a step forward. Small, hesitant, afraid. He sniffed the air as if weighing every possibility. Another step, and another. When his cold, dry nose finally brushed against Michael's fingers, something inside the man shifted. And in that moment, he knew. He couldn't leave him here. This puppy had been alone for too long, and now he never would be again. 2 weeks had passed. The first rays of winter sunlight streamed through the window, filling the room with a soft golden glow. The air carried the faint scent of coffee and old wood mixed with something else. Something new. Something warm. On the floor, near the fireplace, lay Rusty. The little red puppy who had once shivered from the cold in an alleyway now slept, curled up in his soft bed. His nose was buried in the plush blanket, and his tiny paws twitched slightly in his sleep. He murmured, whimpered softly, but it was no longer the muffled cries of fear and pain. Now, They were just dreams. Michael sat in the armchair across from him, a hot cup of coffee in his hands. He watched the puppy, listened to his steady breathing, and felt something strange, something forgotten, settle in his chest. Peace. Rusty no longer looked frightened or lost. His fur had grown thicker and softer, and there was a new spark of life in his amber eyes. His once frail body had grown stronger, his movements more confident. He no longer cowered at every step, no longer flinched at every sound. He wasn't afraid of people anymore. Every morning, Rusty greeted Michael at the door, his tail wagging, his little body bouncing with excitement. Sometimes he proudly carried one of Michael's boots in his mouth, truly believing it was the perfect gift. And sometimes, if Michael took too long in the kitchen, the puppy would settle patiently by his feet, gazing up at him as if to ask, "Well, are we going for a walk or not?" Now he had a life. Now he had a home. Every night he curled up in his bed, stretching his little legs, whimpering softly in his sleep. But he no longer dreamed of cold streets. He no longer dreamed of screams, of pain, of emptiness. Now he dreamed of warmth. He dreamed of gentle hands stroking his head. He dreamed of bright mornings, of running through the park, leaving behind joyful paw prints in the snow. He dreamed of Michael, of family. Michael took a final sip of his coffee and set the cup down on the wooden table. His eyes lingered on the puppy once more. Rusty had been saved. But as he looked at him, Michael suddenly realized he had once been just like him, abandoned, lost, unwanted. After the war, he had come home but never truly felt like he belonged. The bustling streets, the bar conversations, the calls from old friends, it all felt distant, empty. He had existed in a space between past and present, unsure if he had a future at all. He had thought no one needed him anymore. But now everything was different. This little ball of fur he had once found in the snow had given him something no money, no conversation, no attempt at a normal life ever could. Purpose. Now there was a life that depended on him, a life that believed in him. Michael looked at Rusty again and smiled. Sometimes, all it takes to save someone is a single moment. One person who chooses not to look away. And one small desperate step that changes everything.